Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. This is episode 894. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is September 28th in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control and he does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful Central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. Cooled off last night. Supposed to be a nice cool day today. My wife's off today, and my daughter doesn't have horseback riding this afternoon because it's fair week up there. So me and my wife are going to get some work done down in the basement and hauling some stuff off to the scrap metal place in the dump to try to clean up the place before fall and bad weather actually hit. I had a good time yesterday on the show. I like talking about sports. I played some sports. I only played 1 year of high school football before it really blew my knee out. And back then in the early 80s, or actually late 70s when I was playing football my freshman year, there wasn't all these fancy surgeries and stuff like that, so they just let it heal. And they told me, they said my knees were not keeping up with the growth of the rest of my body, and that's not a super common condition, but it is a common condition. But I love watching football. I was a wrestler. I like watching that type of high school type wrestling and stuff like that. I think it's neat. It's a one-on-one sport that a lot of folks, a lot of men, and I guess some women now actually participate in. So I'm just I liked the show yesterday. We talked about some economics. We're going to talk a little bit about that today as far as the taxpayer dollars and the NFL. And I don't really apologize for spending so much time on the NFL in this, and I don't want to call it a scandal, but this issue about kneeling for the national anthem, freedom of speech, and is it, in the workplace, is it absolute? Are the American people thinking right when it comes to this? I have another article that the one I'm going to really start off today with is, I was going to try to get to it yesterday and I didn't, but basically it's an article over at Mises.org by Ray McMacken. Stop wrapping the flag around pro sports. And there's going to be, I did not know this, there were some things that Ryan brings out, in this article that I did not know about. So we're going to get into those things. And the other thing, the other side of that is, there are a lot more problems in the NFL than players taking a knee on the field. I mean, if that is the only problem that the NFL is dealing with, then okay. But there's a lot more serious problems in the NFL that get swept underneath the carpet. And those things are more problematic than players, coaches, owners, and the angst and anger of the fans. I think it's ridiculous. I keep seeing these videos out there. I think it's ridiculous that these folks out there that have bought all this memorabilia, jerseys, hoodies. There was a guy that actually took his season tickets and burnt them. And I don't know if they were actual this year's season tickets. He could have just been making a video. It's a lot of money to throw away. And for what? And for what? And we're going to get into that. I know some people some people aren't going to like some of my thoughts about sports on the show today. And you know what? That's okay. That's absolutely okay because we have to talk about these things. We really, really must talk about these things. And if we don't bring out the questions, we ask the question, why do people do this? And all these other questions that sort of, and you can formulate all these why questions you want, but we need to ask these questions. And this is one thing we try to do on this program. We try to get you to think and put out some thought-provoking issues or talk about these things so you can think and make up your mind for yourself. I'm not here trying to force you to make up your mind, force you saying you got to do this, you got to do that. I've been accused of that a lot over the years, especially by the anti-freedom folks out there, that you're just forcing like with my religion, with Christianity. Well, you're forcing your Christianity on everybody else. And I asked them to give me an example of how I'm forcing you to become a Christian, or how I'm forcing you to live under the conditions that create a Christian. And I've yet to have anybody that has thrown that accusation at me tell me how I'm doing that, how I am forcing them to become a Christian. Now, on the other hand, a lot of these anti-freedom folks, these ethical humanists, these say no to fascists, Antifa, stuff like that, they are, in simple terms, collectivists. They are communists, if you want to use that term. I know that has a pretty negative connotation, and it should. Communism is a very evil way to live. It's an evil type of government. It forces people to conform. And they'll use laws. We have that now. And they're not laws on the books. And this is something I really want to get Chris Ann Hall to come onto the show and explain this. She has some good articles out about judges and that. And explain to people what the Supreme Court, the precedents they send down, and people call them rulings, which they're not. And you can get into a wordplay here, but the Supreme Court is only to be an arbiter of what is or is not constitutional. Compare these laws that Congress is passing or the president does against the Constitution. If the Constitution doesn't support it, it's supposed to be declared unconstitutional. And then it goes back to whoever started this. What's happened is we've got the judiciary system in this country has gotten out of hand, and anti-freedom folks, these ethical humanists, these collectivists, these communists, these anti-fascist folks who are really the ones being fascist, but that's a whole nother story. They're the ones forcing their ideology on other people through legislation and through court rulings. So usually, the older I get, the more I discuss these things with folks that have a different idea from me, the more I come to realize that what they say, what comes out of their mouths, what comes out of their pie holes, if you believe the opposite of that, you're in pretty solid ground. And so with the NFL and everything that's going on with the take a knee and all the anger that's going on out there, all the ill-informed patriotism that's going on out there, and they don't even realize they're doing it. And this is something we really, really need to get in and talk about today. I mean, it's something that's fundamental to the United States of America. And I've titled the show today, Unconstitutional Spending of Tax Dollars. And I won't say any more until we get through the morning minutia, as it were, the daily Bible reading and such. But just think about that as I'm going through this. Unconstitutional spending of taxpayer dollars. All right. Look, folks, if you want a presence on the web, whether you're just trying to get information out or whether you're trying to make a living, you need a hosting service. And not only do you need a hosting service, you need one that's reliable, you need one that's easy, and you need one that's going to have all the plugins you need that may be unique to your online business or your online presence. And can I suggest you do Bluehost? If you go to the DanClementsShow.com and click on the Bluehost button at the top of the page, it'll take you over to their hosting website. And you can explore that. They have free domains. They have a free site builder. They have one-click WordPress install, and that's, folks, that's fantastic. Even the WordPress plugins you buy, one click and they're in. You go in, you set them up. They got tutorials on how to set them up. If there's other things you need to set up on them, like my PayPal donation button and other things in there, my Patreon buttons that I put on my page, fantastic. And you also get 24/7 support, 365 days a year for any of your questions. I have yet to have to use any of the support because it's so straightforward and so easy. And if something doesn't work, the website is intuitive enough to let you know that this isn't working. Now, if you still can't figure it out, they do have the support. So go over to DanClementsShow.com and click on the Bluehost symbol or widget at the top of the page. They're an affiliate marketer of mine, and they're the ones bringing you the show today, and you'll get a really good deal They have back-to-school deals going on right now from $2.95 a month. And even then, when I got my hosting, I got it through the Tom Wood Show, and it was very inexpensive to do that. So if you go over and do that, and you start your web page up through my link going to Bluehost, let me know. Drop me an email. Go to my contact page on the DanClementsShow.com. Drop me an email of what your website is about, and I'll promote it on the show if you do that for me. All right. Today's daily Bible reading, yesterday we were in Philippians chapter 1, and I want to finish up this thought that Paul had started to the Philippians here in chapter 1, starting verse 19, going through verse 24. For I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayer and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. Now, he was talking yesterday, he was talking about how Jesus was preached, whether in pretense or actually, he just was rejoicing that Jesus was being preached. Verse 20, according to my earnest expectation and hope that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but with all boldness as always, so now also Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I live in the flesh, this will mean fruit from my labor, yet what I shall choose I cannot tell. For I am hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart to be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is more needful for you. Folks, in this short passage here, we see the love of the Apostle Paul. He loves Jesus Christ so much that he knows as to live in Christ and to die is gain. If he's living in Christ and he dies in Christ, that's a gain. But he also wanted to make sure that his work that God and Christ set aside for him as the Apostle Paul was finished before he left, because that was more needful for the Christians of that era. Especially he was writing to the Philippians, but in writing to the Philippians, he was writing to Christians everywhere that it was needful. And I just think this, to me, this is just really neat to show that Paul was torn. Yeah, he wanted to be with his Christ, his Lord, and a lot of people do. I do, and I know a lot of people that do also. But, you know, God gave us a work to do on earth too, and we need to be about that work. And that work is needful for the lost. And that's the way Paul looked at it also. Today's quote meal comes from Edward B. Pusey. Never dwell on the tomorrow. Never dwell on the tomorrow. Remember, that is God's and not ours. It's not to say that we shouldn't be mindful of tomorrow. And it's not to say that we shouldn't be planning for tomorrow. But too many people are totally consumed with tomorrow. And being consumed with tomorrow, they forget to live today. They forget to live today. Today's short Bible lesson is actually a sermon outlined by Kevin Cowley over at gewatkins.net. It's Jonah's sermon, Great Lessons from the Life of Jonah. And I was reading down through that, and Kevin brings out a lot of good lessons from the book of Jonah. It's a short prophetic book in the Old Testament, but we can learn a lot of good lessons out of that book, and Kevin Cowley points these out in the sermon lesson. So hopefully you'll go over to the DanClementsShow.com and click on this and read this for yourself. And the reason, folks, one of the reasons why I don't read these anymore during the show here is because I found that if you read it for yourself, you'll remember it, and maybe it'll give you some ideas on other things to study. And but it's just the remembrance. If I read it to you, you may not remember it, but if you go over and read that and study it out for yourself, you'll remember it far longer. And that's one of the reasons why I did that. All right. Let's see. I want to do this because I'm going to use this whole article over here at Mises.org. But basically, the article is entitled, Stop Wrapping the Flag Around Pro Sports. And there's some things that I found out in this article here that I want to bring out to you. This is written by Ryan McMacken, and he posted this up on September 26th of this year. Desperate to fill hours and hours of airtime on 24-hour news channels, media corporations have been sure the discussion of the correct posture of National Football League players has been front and center. Apparently, before grown men can chase a little toy around a grassy field for a few hours, it's absolutely essential that they take part in a variety of pro-government rituals. This was not always the case, though, and prior to the 20th century, it was hardly expected that a ball game was preceded by a recitation of the national anthem and any other song of allegiance. Some assert that current rituals are of especially recent origin, by Tom Curran claiming on Comcast Sportsnet that prior to 2009, football players weren't on the field for the national anthem and instead generally remained in the locker room. There's little doubt that at least some players prior to 2009 elected to be on the field during the anthem, but there is no known current regulation mandating such behavior. Now, I've seen a lot of people, posting posts on Facebook and the such, and saying, citing these regulations, but if you go over and look at the NFL and the regulations, there is no regulation saying that the national anthem has to be played and the players have to be on the field and they have to be standing. There isn't a regulation on that, and I hope that they never do pass that. And that's me speaking for myself. I hope they don't pass that, and hopefully the past couple days, Mondays, yesterday's, and today's show, hopefully will open your eyes to some truths about freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and also some truths about what the federal government and some collectivists in the government have done to one of our national pastimes. The fact that participation in these rituals had become the fact that participation in these rituals had become mandatory in the minds of many Americans, at least, would likely strike 19th century Americans as rather odd. Before the First World War, playing the national anthem or sporting events was quite rare. Excuse me, they put a wrong word in there. No one expected it to be done, and hiring a band was expensive. As is often the case with jingoist displays, however, matters were accelerated and exaggerated by wartime. According to MLB.com, the most conspicuous early use of national anthems was at Game 1 of the 1918 World Series during World War I. Unexpectedly, during the seventh inning stretch, a military band played the national anthem in an effort to liven up the reportedly surly and war-weary groups of spectators. Use of the anthem spread from there. The anthem's use expanded even more during the Second World War, as Matt Soniak notes. During World War II, baseball games again became venues for large-scale displays of patriotism, and technological advances in public address systems allowed songs to be played without a band. The Star-Spangled Banner was played before games throughout the course of the war, and by the time the war was over, the pre-game singing of the national anthem had become cemented as a baseball ritual, after which it spread to other sports. But even after the war, the habit of playing the anthem at every game was not firmly in place until the Vietnam War. It was during the Vietnam War, however, that the spread of the national anthem's use finally met some resistance. Historian Mark Ferris, in his book Star-Spangled Banner, notes that similar protests took place in the NFL during the late 1960s and early 1970s. Ferris recounts how, responding to protests during the playing of the anthem at the 1968 Olympics, the league's commissioner, Pete Rozelle, required players to hold their helmets in their left hand and salute the flag during the anthem. But this was not without its detractors within the NFL, and Ferris notes anthem controversies during the 70s helped institute and increased analysis of sports, which turned into the primary battleground over the beleaguered national anthem and its meaning. By the Obama era, however, not even this grassroots spread of the anthem was sufficient for the federal government. And this is where we sort of leave the road here, especially of the Constitution. By 2009, the Pentagon, now get this, folks, the Pentagon was actively using taxpayer money to pay the National Football League to expand patriotic displays. Now, you remember during the Obama administration, he was one of the most unpatriotic presidents that we've had in a long time. If you want to measure it by patriotism. And they had to do something. They had to do something to take the folks' minds off of what Obama was doing. And this is my own opinion. Maybe I'm far off base here, but I don't think so. But he goes on to say, in 2009, Barack Obama's Department of Defense began paying hundreds of thousands towards teams. Now, there's links throughout this whole article. Some of these links I already looked up for you. If you go to the show notes page over the DanClementsShow.com, you'll see some of these links. But they were paying hundreds of thousands towards teams in a marketing strategy designed to show support for the troops and increase recruitments. The NFL then required all players and personnel to be on the sidelines during the national anthem in exchange for taxpayer dollars. Prior to the national anthem was played in the stadium, but players had the option of staying in the locker room before heading out to the field. Furthermore, teams that showed veterans salutes during games were paid upwards of $5.1 million. Now, folks, remember the title of the show. I want to get out of there. Remember the title of the show, Unconstitutional Spending of Taxpayer Dollars. Now, remember this as I read through this article, folks. In total, $6.8 million in taxpayer money was doled out to sports teams, mostly NFL teams, for so-called paid patriotism. In most cases, the use of the anthem was not directly subsidized. However, usually team owners quite voluntarily employed the anthem as a marketing gimmick. In times of war, team owners were happy to use the anthem as a type of advertising to make an emotional connection between the customers, i.e. the spectators, and the team's product. Wrapping a commercial product in the flag and apple pie to increase sales is hardly unique to pro sports, but pro sports may have used this tactic more successfully than any other industry. Prior to its use in sporting events, the national anthem had been cunningly used by vaudeville acts when the management would bring out the flag to win applause for a poor act. This fact, related by Baltimore Orioles general manager and World War I veteran Arthur Ehlers, was presented as a reason why elders opposed playing the national anthem at every game. Ehlers felt overuse of the anthem could be done cynically and would cheapen the song. And he's got a point there, folks. He does have a point. Others, it turns out, remembered things correctly. In an article in Collier's magazine in 1914, the amused author notes the widespread use of the anthem to elicit a positive response from audience at performances. Nothing is more destructive to gravity than to watch a small oppressed poodle dog walking a tight wire in a vaudeville show with the United States flag hanging from his mouth, while the orchestra plays the Star-Spangled Banner, and some stout, earnest woman standing in solidarity, grandeur in the middle of the house, glares at the sodden mass of humanity which declines to do reverence to the anthem or the flag or the dog. If encouraged in this sort of business, some clog dancer may yet do the doxology in ragtime while the audiences stand with bowed and contrite heads. Apparently in 1914, it had already become fashionable to use the anthem to browbeat spectators into assigning deep meaning to what was clearly, like NFL football, never anything more than trivial lowbrow entertainment. The author, with his sarcastic reference to the anthem as a doxology, knew when he was being manipulated. Would the modern Americans displayed the same level of mental clarity? Decades after Collier's writer observed the anthem's value as a commercial ploy, Ehlers, it seems, was attempting to actually preserve some dignity for the anthem. Unfortunately for the NFL, it didn't listen to Ehlers, and the league's use of the tried and true marketing strategy of draping the flag over everything may be backfiring. The team's employees, and surely many spectators as well, see no problem with using the anthem ritual as an opportunity to make a political statement. The result has been a marketing nightmare for the league. Now, before I read on here, remember, folks, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, is using taxpayer dollars to pay the NFL teams to do this, to use the NFL as a recruiting mechanism. Now, the question you have to ask this: is this a constitutional expenditure of taxpayer dollars? You have to ask that question, folks. Now, there's going to be a lot of people out there, a lot of patriots out there that don't see any problem with that. Well, we're just supporting our troops. We're supporting our country. How dare you call this into question? Well, I'm sorry. I was a veteran. I was in the Navy, and honestly, it didn't make me any better of a sailor to know that the people back home were singing the national anthem or standing the national anthem during sporting events. At all. Now, I'm a little more introspective when it comes to things like that. I think like Veterans Day, the 4th of July, Memorial Day, all these holidays, these national holidays, I think are proper places for these to be done. The Pledge of Allegiance, the national anthem, those type of things, because they're solemn ceremonies, and there's something that there's something I believe that need to be respected. But just having the knowledge that people were expected, players, fans, and everything, had their minds have been conditioned to think along these lines that we have to sing the national anthem. We have to, everything has to be draped in patriotism and the flag, our sporting events and everything. This is something we've been conditioned to do, and I think a lot of people like me, myself, and I didn't know that taxpayer dollars were used by the Pentagon to promote this. And I'm a little mad about that, because it is an unconstitutional use of taxpayer dollars, and two, I believe it's a false patriotism. If you have an audience that paid to be there, there's sort of a captive audience. If they want to see the game, they got to go through this ritual of the national anthem, everybody singing in that. And like I said, doing that, singing the national anthem, and standing up, respecting the flag, it's apolitical, in my opinion. What's happened is people, good folks, well-intentioned, but unintentionally have turned it into something that it should never been turned into. And teams should not, paying somebody to be patriotic, does that make them patriotic? I go back to the New Testament. They had, if you read through the Gospels, there were several occasions that Jesus went in and healed somebody, and there were a lot of mourners there. And if you go back and do some research on these mourners, a lot of these mourners were paid to do that. They didn't know the family, but the family wanted mourners there, so there was these people that you could pay to come and mourn at a funeral. And I don't see the difference in this. If you're paying me to be patriotic, if you're paying the NFL, and this is a recruiting gimmick, and you're getting all these people to be patriotic because of someone being paid to be, are you really patriotic? Is that what we're supposed to be about as Americans? I don't think so. This is a private sector issue, by the way. Although this has been taken up by politicians such as Donald Trump as a matter of critical importance, it really should be viewed as just a private business matter. Though Bishop has noted that as private firms, each team should be free to discipline or fire any employee who might cause customer displeasure or a loss of revenue to the team. The question, of course, is whether it might be even worse in terms of earnings for a team to eliminate its most talented athletes. That's a business decision the owners will have to make. And I said this yesterday. I think Donald Trump was totally wrong in inserting himself in this. It's not the place of the President of the United States to do that. And technically Michelle Malkin is right, because these guys are taking not only this money from the DOD, the Pentagon, for the national anthem as a marketing thing, stadiums, and I'm not going to get to them today, and I hope you go over to DanClementsShow.com and read some of the articles about how much tax dollars these folks. I got one more article I'm going to read, or I won't get into it, but there is one, just how much money does the NFL rake in from taxpayers? And it's in the billions of dollars, folks. Now, it's over a period of time, but when the National Football League has a gross or a net, I think it's a net income of $14 billion a year, the hundreds of million dollars that are spent each year over a period of time that's taken out of taxpayer pockets, there's no reason why they couldn't afford that. There's no reason why they couldn't afford that. And finally, towards the end of the article, everything's political. Everything's become political in our society. And folks, that's not a good thing, that everything has become political. And when I say everything's become political, it's become politically correct. It's PC. Everything seems to be PC. And folks, it shouldn't be that way. It should not be that way, that everything is PC. Everything's political. It's got to be politically correct, And like I said, some people are going to be mad at me. How dare you suggest that we leave it up to the teams and the stadiums and whatever sports franchise it is, whether they're going to sing the national anthem before the game or not. And I'm like, yes, leave it up to them. Get the politics out of it. Get the taxpayer dollars out of it, and leave it up to the teams and the fans. Now, this is another thing. The NFL itself is a crony capitalist organization because of the tax dollars they get from the federal, state, and local level. They are crony capitalists. And don't get me wrong, it's okay. I think it's okay for local municipalities to give businesses tax breaks. Okay? And I even think it's okay for the state level to give businesses tax breaks at the state level, because a lot of states have a corporate tax. And I think that's within the purview of the state or the several states. But I don't think, and I haven't read in the Constitution where that's in the purview of the federal government to use taxpayer dollars. I don't read that in Article 1, Section 8 anywhere, that we're allowed to take taxpayer dollars and give them to a corporation. That's how crony capitalism gets started. So the NFL is a perfect example of crony capitalism. But what I'm going to say next is this is an example. What's going on right now with the NFL and the ratings and everything is an example of free market capitalism on the fan side of things. They don't like the product that NFL's putting out, and they're walking with their money. They're absolutely walking with their money. I mean, there's stories this whole week. Stories come out where advertisers have been refunded money from TV ad sales. DirecTV has been refunding. Usually at the beginning of the season is the cutoff for a Sunday ticket for DirecTV, and because of the slumping viewerships and everything, if you want right now, you can get a refund on your Sunday ticket, and that's almost $300, like $280 on the dish. And they also have an app that if you want it on your computers to take with you, it's an additional $70 for the season to do that. They're refunding all this. And when everything comes out in the wash, no matter which way this goes, the fans are really the ones ultimately in control of what's going to happen every Sunday, Monday, and Thursday in the NFL. Because if they quit watching, then where are they going to get their money to pay these exorbitant fees for the players, the multi-million-dollar contracts they have for all these players on every team? We're talking about a $14 billion a year industry, folks, and they said that's just net profits, so their gross profits are way above that. So this is a perfect example of free market capitalism on the fan side, on the spectator side. They're not getting the product that they expect, and so they're walking with their dollars. Now, I believe, like a lot of people believe also, that eventually this is just going to blow over, and it's going to be, one of those things that just keeps happening. But I want to get over to there's another article I want to share with you. I forgot to put it up here. I'm sorry, folks. Give me a second to get this going here. And this is an article over at, from Foundation for Economic Education by Jennifer Maffessanti. Maffessanti. Jennifer. I'll just call her Jennifer for right now. And this, folks, this is another one of those things that I think that we really need to pay attention to. Because like I said earlier in the show, and during my monologue, that if you're mad because players are taking a knee during the national anthem, which to me is minor. That's a minor thing. In the grand scheme of things, it's a minor thing. I know a lot of people disagree with me on that. Tough. We're putting out my opinion, and the reason why I'm putting out this opinion is you have to, if this was the only thing that was happening in the NFL, taking a knee, okay, let's deal with it. But there are far greater sins. There are far greater sins that the NFL is sweeping under the rug. And it amazes me. It amazes me the short memories of sports fans out there. And Jennifer starts off, man, I love football. I love the grit and the effort and the sheer spectacle of it. In fact, I'm watching the Atlanta Falcons play the Detroit Lions as I write this. I remember the first time I sat down and watched a football game from start to finish. It was in the dorms of my first semester of college. I was 17. Auburn was playing, but I don't remember against whom. I mostly sat down that afternoon to watch because I was flirting with a boy. He played with my ponytail through the second half. Nothing ever happened with him, but that game changed the course of fall weekends for the rest of my life. Now we're talking, this is when I was reading through this, I had to go back up and check that name again. This is a woman. Her name's Jennifer. And there are a lot of women out there. I'm not saying they're not. I don't find too many in my life and my sphere of influence that like to sit down and watch football. For me, it's a rarity. I know it's not a rarity for a lot of people, but for me, it's a rarity. I'll be the first to admit that football is problematic. It's rough. It's violent. Some people think it's boring. Injuries up to and including permanent brain damage are common. Others say that football is a proxy for aggressive nationalism, pitting one team against another, and a collective struggle that is zero-sum. Or maybe football is a safety valve, the contest that absorbs normal tribal instincts and turn them into innocent commercial entertainment. Like the bread and circus of the Roman gladiator events, gladiatorial events, something like that, folks. I wasn't reading that in there. I was just putting that in as a comment. Indeed, the NFL has weathered its fair share of scandals, and none of that high theory includes the off-field behavior of the players. Indeed, the NFL has weathered its fair share of scandals. Now, Michael Vick was one of them. And everybody that's an NFL fan, and a lot of people that aren't, remember Michael Vick and his problem with the dogfighting ring that he was in. But the Eagles picked him up. He's playing. The game goes on. Joe Mixon, who played his college ball for Oklahoma, was caught on video punching a woman in the face at a bar. He was then drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals and still plays there. Ray Rice, Adrian Peterson, Ben Roethlisberger. In point of fact, there have been at least 44 different players, and she has a link in this article here, who have been accused of physical or sexual assault in the last few years. Some were suspended for a few games. A couple were let go. Most were not particularly punished, and the game went on. Investigation has shown that many NFL players have been violating federal laws when it comes to narcotic painkiller prescriptions. Considering all the attention that the country's opioid epidemic has been getting, I'm a little surprised. I didn't know about that until I started researching for this article. In fact, the NFL seems perfectly content to quietly allow drug and alcohol abuse in its ranks just so long as those indulging don't do anything embarrassing on camera. And then then we come to what is, to me, the most devastating scandal of all, the CTE. It stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I'll get that out there. And is the result of repeated impacts to the head. We're talking concussions, folks. That's what we're talking about. In the form of brain damage, and symptoms can range in severity from simple headaches to violent impulses and suicidality. Of course, CTE is found in players of other contact sports like rugby, ice hockey, and boxing too. but it's been alleged that the NFL knew about the prevalence and negative effects of CTE and did nothing to warn the players. Even to the point that in 2013, a group of former players won a $760 million settlement against the league, but the game went on. Then in 2016, Colin Kaepernick, then quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, took a knee during a pregame playing of the National Anthem, and it felt like the entire country lost its collective mind. That's why I'm glad I read the other article first there, folks, for you, before I got to this. And how dare you, cried people. People fought and died for this country, and you damn well better stand for the anthem. By way of explanation, Kaepernick said, I'm not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. To me, this is bigger than football, and it would be selfish on my part to look the other way. There are bodies in the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder. Now he's talking about these police brutality cases, which for the most part are being taken care of, handled by the local jurisdictions. My point I'm going to make here outside this article is, I don't see these players like Kaepernick going out and protesting these things or setting up a think tank or, whatever. Now I know he's unemployed now, so he's got to watch his pennies, but he probably has a few $1 million squirreled away, or at least he should, out of that contract that he was already paid. He was referring to the events that led to the Black Lives Matter movement. In solidarity, several other athletes in various sports also began either taking a knee or raising a fist during the national anthem. Opinions about Kaepernick's actions were sharply split, with very little being abject outrage and strong support. Those divisions appeared largely along racial lines. And then she goes on to talk about after the 2016 season, Kaepernick became a free agent, and he's yet to be picked up by another team. Ostensibly, this is because his performance has been declining, though it's not difficult to imagine that this is a very visible protest had something to do with it. First, he wasn't that good of a quarterback to begin with. I watched him in the Super Bowl. I believe it was, can't remember who he's playing, but they got trounced, and Kaepernick didn't do anything. I mean, for all the lust and luster that was, the fanfare that brought him to the 49ers, where did it go, right? And she goes on to talk about if it wasn't for Donald Trump on September 22nd. Folks, this was heating up well before Donald Trump got into it. Donald Trump just put the icing and cherry on top of the cake. After Donald Trump's responses, this led to some heated responses, and this does have some pretty troubling implications. The President of the United States is calling for those who peacefully exercise their First Amendment rights, SOBs, and asking that they be fired. That's a problem, and it is a problem. Like I said, I didn't agree with Donald Trump when he was talking like that. I believe that should be left up to the teams. If you go back to my Monday show, this past Monday on September 25th, I talked about, the teams is free speech in the workplace, absolute, and no, it's not. And this should be, all these issues with this national anthem should have never got outside the NFL as far as politics. Now, with the fans and everything, yes. Again, yesterday's show, if you bite the hand that feeds you, be careful, because that same hand could come back and slap you. And that's exactly what's happened in the NFL. The teams and the players, for better for worse, if you agree with them or not, are biting the hand that feeds them. That's the fans that buy all the jerseys, that buy into all the advertisements, the endorsements and everything, pay to be at the stadiums, pay to watch it on TV on Sunday Ticket, on DirecTV, and so the fans are slapping back. And again, this should be a private issue, as the last article by Ryan McMacken was talking about. So we get down towards the end of the article here. The last straw. Once again, people are so angry. I've seen people on social media call the people who choose to kneel the C word, making the same tired argument about people fighting and dying. They're claiming to be done with the NFL and will no longer watch it or buy any of their merchandise. This is their hill to die on. If you want to be done with the NFL and boycott them, fine, that's your right. So the rampant drug use, physical and sexual violence, animal abuse, and widespread brain damage were fine, but the peaceful exercise of free speech is not. Duly noted, guys. Jennifer makes a good point here, and that's why I bring this article up here, because the NFL, and we're just going to deal with the NFL, has been plagued with scandals over the years, yet where was the fan outrage? Now, there was some fan outrage with Michael Vick, but it wasn't as widespread as this is. And there should have been. There should have been more outrage about Michael Vick. Matt, as far as I'm concerned, and this is just me, and I don't want to take anybody's livelihood away from him, but I know that he apologized and paid penance and stuff like that, but in my personal opinion, I think he should have found another job instead of being in the public eye like he is. That's my personal opinion. You know, the Eagles did what they did. They hired him. He's doing a good job. I'm not saying anything about that, but, you know, to me, that was pretty bad. The dogfighting was pretty bad to me with that. And I agree with Jennifer here. You didn't burn your jerseys because there was rampant drug use or physical or sexual violence, animal abuse, or brain damage caused by the helmets and stuff like that. And there's another note about that. This year they're using a new helmet that, you know, some bioengineers have actually made that should either cut down or eliminate the concussions. Now, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, because the more pads you put on a guy, the more you say that the equipment's going to stop the injuries, the more the more invincible they feel. I mean, that's a psychological fact, folks. Let me finish this up. Don't get me wrong. If you want to be done with the NFL and boycott them, fine. That's your right. But this is the last straw. It says more about you than it does about football. Football in general, and the NFL in particular, is far from perfect. I admit that, and I do struggle with my supporting through viewership of the problems I listed above. But players kneeling during the national anthem is far from the worst thing done by the members of the league. And if you can't handle the people doing something you disagree with, the problem's not the NFL. And folks, that goes back to something other that's kind of fundamental. You know, this thing, oh, I'm offended by what you say. All right, that's on you. It's not on me. You know, now if I come in and call you, you know, a dirty, rotten, bow-legged, scruffy-looking nerf herder, you know, you can take umbrage to that. You know, and you might be offended by that because I just called you a name, but it shouldn't go much further than that. If I espouse a certain political view or a certain political stance, like unconstitutional spending of taxpayer dollars, and you disagree with me on that and take offense to me wanting the government to get out of health care. A lot of people take offense to me saying that. Well, how dare you? How uncompassionate you are. And compassion has nothing to do with it. It's just like, and let me use this example here. I got about 10 minutes left here. Let me get a drink of coffee here. I've been talking for a long time. This is the problem when you're spending other people's money, especially, and we're going to take it up to, I'm going to take it to the federal government level. This applies to all levels of government, local, state, and federal. But I'm going to pick on the federal government right now because they seem to be the most egregious offenders of this. When you're spending other people's money, i.e. tax dollars, you're never, ever going to get 100% agreement on how that money should be spent on a certain program. And the Founding Fathers knew this. What did the Founding Fathers do? They went into the Constitution, Article 1, Congress. All legislative powers are vested in Congress. Great. The only laws can be made come out of Congress. That's whether it's the House or the Senate. All spending bills originate in House representatives. Why? Because the House representatives are deemed to be closer to the people. Okay, gotcha. You know, common sense stuff here, folks. Then you go down through Section 8, Article 1, Section 8, and you see the enumerated powers that the federal government was granted by the states. Now, a lot of people in America today don't believe that the federal government was created by the states. They would be wrong. I'm not afraid to tell them that they'd be wrong. Now, if that offends you, that's on you, not me, that you're wrong. It doesn't offend me that you're wrong. But anyway, nowhere in the enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8 is there authorized for the federal government to give federal taxpayer dollars any way, shape, or form to the National Football League. Even $1 is too much. Because there's a lot of taxpayers out there that you're collecting money from that if, one, maybe not even know what the NFL is, and two, could care less. There's a lot of people out there that do not like sports. They just don't. And you know what? Fine. Okay. I'm not offended if they don't like sports. But they may be offended to know that their tax dollars are being spent on sports. And if you break it down to the state and local level, with the stadium deals that these, I'm going to stick with the NFL, but baseball's the same way, hockey, the NBA, they get these lucrative stadium deals. They get, the biggest offense is they're treated like a public utility in that they can get these bonds, these municipal bonds that are tax-free, that people can invest in to get these stadium built. And that's where a lot of the tax dollars come from. Any other business does not get these municipal bonds. They have to go raise the funds themselves, find venture capitalists that want to invest in it, or if they have enough wherewithal themselves, they build it themselves instead of relying on these bonds. Now, I'm not going to get to it because we're running out of time here, but I have some articles in here that there's some bills coming up that they're actually, Cory Booker, Democrat in New Jersey, I think a year or so ago, introduced this bill to defund the NFL of tax dollars. And now that this whole anthem thing's come up and all this things, and if there's one good thing that's going to come out of this, maybe we'll get a bill passed that cuts off the tax dollars to the NFL. Now, the NFL has lobbyists up in D.C., and they're going to fight tooth and nail to keep the tax dollars. I don't see where they have a leg to stand on. And the American people need to get a hold of their congressmen, their representatives, their senators, and tell them, hey, NFL shouldn't get any of our tax dollars. They're a business out there. Matter of fact, I think they should go further than the NFL. I think they should stop. I think the federal government should stop all corporate welfare. That would end a lot of this. But the fact of the matter that they're getting tax dollars to begin with just makes me nuts. Let's take health care. You've heard me talk about health care for a long time on this program. There is nowhere in the Constitution to authorize the federal government to take over 1/7 of our economy. The health care industry, insurance, and the dispensing of health care. Now, you'll have people out there that wrongfully will say, well, that's what the General Welfare Clause is there for. That is not what the General Welfare Clause means. That's not what it's there for. Because the General Welfare Clause means when they pass a law, it's for the general welfare of everybody. Now, you can't tell me, and they try to make this argument, and they're really stretching their arguments when they say, well, if we as a country take care of sick people, then that's to the general welfare of the country, therefore we should be doing it. That's how they stretch that. But that's taking it well beyond that because before the government got involved in all this stuff unconstitutionally, people were taking care of their health care. They were taking care of their health insurance. And the biggest lie that was told during the Obama administration to get this thing passed were, we got millions of people. We got like 50 million people that are uninsured or underinsured. They put the phrase in there to both of that. Well, part of the uninsured were millennials, 20 and early 30-somethings, that didn't want to, they were looking at their budgets, they didn't want to spend money on health insurance, and they were taking that risk, and it's a risk, that they were going to stay healthy. And for the vast percentage of them, that panned out. That panned out. And again, remember, we don't govern on the margins. And then there was another group of adults that made up the other, probably 10 to 15 million folks who just didn't want health insurance. They looked, it wasn't that they couldn't afford it, they just didn't want it. I know people today that just don't want health insurance. Okay. it's not a burden on me. It's not a burden on you. If something happens and they can't afford it, that's on them. Some of them are well-to-do. A lot of them are well-to-do, and they can afford to spend money on their health care outside the system without having to pay into insurance. And there was a large portion of that group that were in that situation, but the government lied, and so we have health care. One of these unconstitutional things to be spending money on. Welfare, another unconstitutional thing, and we just can keep going right down the line. And I think if we learn anything from this NFL take the knee, to me, again, I like Jennifer to be our hill to die on. I think is ridiculous. There's more important things we should be concerned with if you're going to be concerned about sports in the NFL. Again, these brutes. These guys are big guys. I'm 6'1", and there's a lot of NFL players that dwarf me, weight-wise and build and height and everything. And for them to commit domestic violence with either their partners or their wives, that's not a man. I'm sorry, that's not a man. That's a brute animal. And yet, a lot of that's swept under the rug. A lot of that because they're famous NFL players. At one time, one of the running jokes about the Dallas Cowboys was there was more Dallas Cowboys spending time in court than they were on the practice field at one time. That was true. That was true. And we laugh about this, but this is even filtered down into college football. The biggest one I remember is down when in the Florida Seminoles, Florida State Seminoles. And I can't remember the coach's name off the top of my head, but had a couple players got in trouble with the law. And all they got was a slap on the wrist. The Buckeyes. It was one of the quarterbacks. I don't know if is it Barrett? Might have even been Barrett when he was a freshman. Got in trouble with alcohol. He got punished. He was benched for a while. That didn't go unpunished. And I'm not saying, and I think he still had to do things on the outside. They didn't let him out of his community service. They gave him community service. They didn't let him out of that. I'm not sure. I can't remember all the things that happened in Florida, but it seemed to me that the person got a slap on the wrist compared to other schools in the nation. And it's all because they're this sports figure. Hollywood figures. Just because you're an actor or an actress and you're famous, that means a lot of people know you. There's been a lot of looking the other way. There's been a lot of looking the other way. And this take the knee is, again, this is the hill you're going to die on. Really? Really? And I thank Jennifer for bringing that up, for pointing that out, because this is something that we need to be thinking about. This is something that we always need to keep in mind, that we need to remember that we need to pick our battles, we need to pick our fights, we need to pick whatever hill we're going to die on folks, really. And this ain't it. This is not it. It's been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless. And we'll see you tomorrow for Free for All Friday. And I got some really good articles already stored up for you tomorrow for Free for All Friday. So you guys have, again, a great rest of the day, and God bless. And we'll see you tomorrow.